One broken window on an empty street doesn't cause a crime wave by itself. But leave it unrepaired for a month, and something strange happens. More windows break. Graffiti shows up. Litter piles up on the sidewalk. Nobody bothered to sweep. Eventually, somebody tries a car door. This isn't superstition. It's one of the most tested ideas in the history of crime psychology. And it turns out to explain something far more useful to you than street crime. It explains why your best employees are quietly learning to cut corners, and you probably handed them the lesson yourself. The idea is called broken windows theory, and criminologists got their real-world test case in New York City in the 1980s, on the subway system specifically. At the time, the subways were a byword for chaos. Officials made a decision that looked almost trivial next to the city's actual crime problem. They went after fare jumping and graffiti. Not muggings, not the serious stuff, the small stuff. People thought it was a waste of police time. Within a few years, serious crime on the system had dropped sharply. The theory behind it says that visible small disorder isn't neutral background noise, it's a signal. It tells everyone who sees it that nobody is watching, nobody enforces anything, and nobody will stop you from going further. Fix the small disorder fast and visibly, and you remove the signal. Leave it, and you're broadcasting an invitation. Here's the part that matters for you, and it has nothing to do with subways. This exact mechanism runs inside teams, departments, and companies every single day, and almost nobody names it when it's happening. Picture an ordinary team. One person starts showing up 15 minutes late to the morning stand-up. Nobody says anything, it's not worth the awkwardness over 15 minutes. Another person skips a step on the review checklist because the deadline's tight, and ships anyway. Nobody flags it because the release went fine. A third person pads an expense report by a small, forgettable amount. Nobody's going to start a fight over coffee receipts. Individually, not one of these things sinks a company. That's exactly the trap. Each one looks too small to be worth the conflict of addressing it. But nothing in a team happens in a vacuum where only the actor and the act exist. There's always an audience. Everyone else on that team is watching, consciously or not, cataloging what actually gets a reaction and what doesn't. And when the answer is nothing gets a reaction, that becomes data. It tells the room, more loudly than any policy memo ever could, that the stated standard and the real standard are two different things, and the real one is lower. This is worth sitting with, because it inverts how most people think about workplace tolerance. We tend to imagine that letting small things go is a form of kindness, or at least of picking your battles. Sometimes it is, but there's a difference between choosing not to escalate something and never correcting it at all. The broken windows insight is specifically about the second one, the small lapse that just sits there, uncorrected, visible to everyone, indefinitely. That's the state that erodes standards, not the individual leniency of any one moment. And once that erosion starts, it doesn't stay contained to the specific behavior that started it. This is the part people miss. It's not that late arrivals cause more late arrivals in some narrow, literal way. It's that the tolerance itself generalizes. If lateness slides, the message isn't, lateness is fine here. The message is broader and vaguer and more corrosive than that. Enforcement here is selective or absent and depends on whether someone feels like having the conversation. Once people believe that, they don't just test the exact same boundary that got tested before, they test whichever boundary is most convenient for them at the time. The checklist skipper isn't inspired by the late arriver specifically. They're inspired by the ambient sense that nothing here actually gets checked. This is why the theory translates so cleanly from a subway platform to an office floor, even though the two environments look nothing alike. A subway car and a quarterly project have almost nothing in common on the surface. What they share is an audience of people constantly, silently reading the environment for cues about what's actually enforced versus what's just written down somewhere. Humans are relentless pattern matchers on exactly this question, because it's evolutionarily useful to know what a group actually tolerates rather than what it claims to tolerate. Knowing the real rules, not the posted ones, is how you avoid becoming the person who gets penalized for something everyone else gets away with. A workplace is, in this narrow sense, no different from a subway platform. It's a shared environment that everyone in it is constantly, quietly, auditing for signals about what's real. There's also a reason small infractions specifically carry so much signal, more than their objective size would suggest. A major violation, outright fraud, a serious safety breach, something that obviously crosses a bright line, almost always gets addressed because the stakes are too visible to ignore and the social cost of staying silent about it is too high. Small infractions are exactly the opposite. They sit below the threshold where anyone feels compelled to act, which is precisely why they're the ones that go unaddressed, and precisely why they're the ones doing the real signaling work. Nobody learns anything meaningful about their organization's actual standards from watching a major scandal get punished. Of course, it got punished. Everyone expected that. People learn everything about their organization's actual standards from watching the small stuff, the stuff that could plausibly be ignored, and noticing whether it actually is. Consider how this plays out at real scale, because it's not just a small team phenomenon, it's the exact mechanism behind one of the more infamous corporate scandals in recent memory. Wells Fargo's fake account scandal is usually told as a story about fraud, and eventually, it was fraud, at a scale that made headlines. But it didn't start there. It started with small, quota-driven shortcuts, the kind of thing that, viewed in isolation on day one, looks like an aggressive but forgivable interpretation of a sales target. Nobody sat down on day one and decided to build a fraud machine. What happened instead was that early instances of corner cutting went uncorrected because correcting them felt disproportionate to the offense, or because the people who could have corrected them were themselves under the same pressure. Each uncorrected instance became the new flaw. The flaw kept dropping until an enormous number of accounts existed that customers never asked for. The mechanism is identical to graffiti on a subway car. Nobody planned the endpoint. The endpoint was the compounding result of nobody fixing the start. This is why the manager who avoids conflict over small infractions because it's not worth it is making a much bigger decision than they realize. They think they're choosing between a minor confrontation and no confrontation. They're actually choosing between a minor confrontation now and a much larger one later, because the behavior doesn't stay contained. It either gets corrected while it's still small and cheap to correct, or it becomes the new normal and gets inherited by everyone watching. And your best people are, by definition, the most attentive to what the environment actually rewards and tolerates. They are not immune to this signal. If anything, they read it faster and more accurately than anyone else on the team, because reading incentives accurately is part of what makes them good at their jobs in the first place. A manager who lets minor rule-breaking slide isn't protecting their strongest performers from unnecessary friction. They're training them methodically that cutting corners is a viable strategy here, and these are exactly the people with the skill to cut corners well enough not to get caught for a long time. There's a version of this that plays out even faster in remote and hybrid teams, worth naming on its own because it's become the default way a lot of people work now. When everyone's in the same physical room, small lapses are at least visible in real time. Someone notices the late arrival. Someone overhears the rushed handoff. Spread a team across screens, asynchronous updates, and messages that get skimmed instead of read. And small lapses become even easier to miss and even easier to leave uncorrected, simply because nobody's forced to be physically present for them. The broken windows mechanism doesn't weaken in that environment. If anything, it strengthens. Because the correction has to be even more deliberate to happen at all. Nobody's going to stumble into fixing a sloppy handoff in a distributed team by accident, the way they might by literally walking past it in an office. The signal-to-noise problem gets worse, and the manager's job of actively noticing gets correspondingly harder and more important at the same time. So what actually breaks the cycle? Not what most people reach for first. The instinctive response to hearing all this is to think the fix must be some kind of zero-tolerance regime, harsh, dramatic consequences for the first infraction, a culture of fear around every small mistake. That's not what the research supports, and it's not what worked on the subway either. The subway crackdown wasn't about maximum punishment for fare jumping. It was about fast, visible, consistent correction. Somebody jumps a turnstile, somebody responds, not 3 weeks later in a formal disciplinary hearing. Right then, proportionate to the offense, but real. That distinction, fast and visible versus severe and theatrical, is the whole game. Zero-tolerance theater is exhausting. It breeds resentment, and ironically, it often gets applied inconsistently anyway, because nobody has the stomach to enforce draconian penalties for genuinely small things. What actually resets the signal is not fear, it's reliability. Translate that into a team, and the fix looks almost anticlimactic compared to the size of the problem it prevents. Somebody sends a client email with an obvious typo that gets flagged and fixed, not ignored, because it's just a typo. A deadline gets missed that gets addressed the same week it happens in a real conversation, not filed away for the quarterly review where it'll arrive, stripped of context and 6 other data points removed from the moment that actually mattered. A handoff between 2 people on the team is sloppy, missing information the next person needed that gets named in the very next stand-up, not stored up as an example for someone's annual performance discussion months from now. None of these responses need to be harsh. They need to be prompt, and they need to be visible to more than just the 2 people involved, because the visibility is what carries the signal to everyone else who's watching and calibrating. The correction doesn't need to be a big event. It needs to reliably happen. This is where a lot of well-intentioned managers still trip, because there's a natural instinct to handle small corrections privately, quietly, out of a genuine desire to be kind and not embarrass anyone in front of the team. That instinct is right about the tone a small correction should never be a public shaming, and turning every minor lapse into a spectacle just recreates the zero-tolerance theatre problem from the other direction. But there's a difference between a private, respectful correction and a correction that's so invisible nobody besides the 2 people involved ever learns it happened at all. If the whole point is resetting what the team believes about enforcement, the team needs some way of knowing enforcement occurred, not the humiliating details, just the fact that the standard held. A manager can say, in the next stand-up, without naming anyone or making it uncomfortable, that handoffs need a specific piece of information going forward, because a recent one was missing it. That's enough. It resets the signal without costing anyone their dignity. And it does more real work than a stern one-on-one that only 2 people ever find out happened. It also helps to think about timing the way an immune system works rather than the way a legal system works. A legal system waits for evidence to accumulate, builds a case, and hands down a proportionate verdict once the process concludes, which is exactly the model most annual review cycles are built on. And it's exactly wrong for this purpose. An immune system doesn't wait to build a case. It responds to the first sign of intrusion immediately, before the problem has any chance to establish itself and multiply. Standards work more like the second model than the first. The cost of correcting a lapse goes up the longer it's allowed to sit, not because the original act gets worse with age, but because every day it goes uncorrected is another day it's silently teaching the room that this is fine. Waiting for the quarterly review to address a missed deadline doesn't just delay the correction. It changes what the correction means once it finally arrives. Instead of, we hold this standard, it reads as, we occasionally remember to hold this standard when the paperwork comes due. That reliability is what keeps big violations rare. And this is the genuinely counterintuitive core of the whole idea. Consistency on the small stuff is not a separate, softer concern from preventing the big stuff. It is the mechanism that prevents the big stuff. Most managers think of minor process violations and major integrity failures as different categories requiring different playbooks. You shrug at the small ones and reserve your energy for the ones that actually threaten the business. But the subway data and the Wells Fargo trajectory both point the same direction. The big failures are very often just the small failures nobody corrected, left running long enough to compound. If you want fewer major violations, the highest leverage place to intervene isn't the major violation, it's the minor one that happened 18 months earlier and got a shrug instead of a fix. Here's a way to think about it that might be uncomfortable, and it's worth being honest about it rather than softening it. Every team already has a real standard, and it is very rarely identical to the written one, the one in the onboarding deck or the values poster on the wall. The real standard is whatever behavior the team has actually observed getting corrected versus what it's observed sliding. You don't set your team's real standard by writing it down. You set it continuously, in real time, whether you intend to or not, by what you respond to and what you let pass. A manager who never confronts small lapses because they're trying to be easygoing, or trying to avoid being seen as petty, isn't opting out of setting a standard. There's no opting out available. They're setting one anyway, by default, and it's lower than the one they'd tell you they believe in if you ask them directly. Here's my own honest read on why this particular management failure is so persistent, despite how simple the fix sounds once you lay it out. It's not that managers don't understand the theory. Most people, once they hear the subway example, get it instantly and can apply it as an analogy in seconds. It's that the fix requires paying a small, certain, immediate cost, the mild discomfort of a correction, to avoid a large, uncertain, deferred cost that might not show up on your watch at all, might land on the next manager, or might just never fully materialize into a headline scandal. That's a genuinely hard trade for a person to make consistently, because the discomfort is guaranteed and the disaster is only probabilistic. The managers who actually pull it off aren't the ones with the most willpower. They're the ones who've built the correction into a routine, the same stand-up agenda item, the same weekly review question, so it stops being a decision they have to individually screw up the courage for every single time and becomes something closer to a habit that runs on its own. So the next time something small slides across your desk, the late arrival nobody mentions, the checklist step that got skipped because things were busy, the expense report that's just a little generous, remember that you're not choosing whether to have an awkward 30-second conversation. You're choosing what floor your whole team quietly agrees to stand on from here forward. Fix the small thing while it's still small, visibly, quickly, without drama, and the big thing very often just never shows up to test you. Leave the window broken, and eventually somebody tries the door. If this kind of thing is useful to you, go ahead and hit subscribe. There's a new breakdown coming out every week.